It was the tense morning of a decisive encounter on the European front. The air thick with anticipation, fear, and the scent of imminent battle. As soldiers and officers moved with measured urgency through the frost-covered fields, their boots crunching on frozen earth, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of movement. While the commanding general, resolute, composed, and acutely aware of the stakes, studied the landscape, the enemy, and the fragile balance of power in this moment that would ripple through history. And as emissaries from the German command approached, their posture rigid, their expressions unreadable, yet emanating the unmistakable authority of a demand backed by overwhelming force, the tension thickened, a palpable pressure that seemed to press against the very air, constricting, demanding attention, focus, and clarity. And as the German officers delivered their ultimatum, their words cutting through the cold air like blades, insisting on surrender, obedience, and immediate compliance, a hush fell over the assembled troops, each man sensing the gravity of the moment, understanding that this was not simply a negotiation, but a confrontation of wills, courage, and principle. And in the silence that followed, every heartbeat seemed amplified, every breath sharp with anticipation, every glance exchanged, loaded with unspoken calculations of risk. Survival and honor, and the general standing tall, absorbing the weight of history, of the eyes upon him, of the countless lives dependent on his judgment, paused for a single measured heartbeat, the world narrowing to the clarity of choice, the simplicity and power of a response that could echo through time. And then, with absolute calm, the general spoke a single word, one word that encapsulated defiance, strategy, and unyielding resolve. A word so simple in form yet monumental in consequence, and as it left his lips, the soldiers felt a surge of adrenaline, courage, and unity. Their collective awareness focused entirely on the general's action, as if that one word had crystallized the chaos of war into a singular moment of clarity, resistance, and purpose. And the German emissaries, caught in the sudden, almost tangible force of defiance, paused, their composure momentarily shaken, confronted with a resolve that transcended numerical superiority, weaponry, or intimidation, a resolve that demanded recognition, recalibration, and an understanding that the human spirit, courage, and principle could not be coerced or commanded by threats alone. And in that suspended moment, time seemed to stretch, each second filled with psychological tension, unspoken calculations, and the historical weight of the encounter, as soldiers, officers, and even enemy observers sensed that they were witnessing a defining act, a pivot upon which not only the immediate engagement but the narrative of courage, leadership, and defiance in the war could turn. And as the word echoed in the crisp morning air, its impact rippled through ranks, shaping perceptions, galvanizing resolve, and forging a bond between the general and his men that was immediate, unspoken, and indestructible, a recognition that leadership was not merely tactical but moral, not merely positional but inspirational, and that the courage to speak, act, and embody principle in the face of overwhelming pressure could alter not only the immediate course of events, but the interpretation of history itself. And as the soldiers internalized the significance of the moment, preparing to execute the strategies, maneuvers, and defensive actions dictated by their orders, the air remained thick with anticipation. The fog of uncertainty and potential conflict intertwining with the clarity of resolve, creating a psychological environment that tested focus, endurance, and morale, while simultaneously magnifying the profound simplicity and power of the general's one-word response, which acted as both shield and rallying cry, weapon and symbol anchoring the soldiers' courage, guiding their actions, and shaping the course of events as they unfolded. And as the German officers attempted to maintain their composure, recognizing the unyielding determination, strategic brilliance, and moral authority of the American command, a subtle recalibration occurred. The encounter transformed from a unilateral demand into a complex negotiation of wills, strategy, and endurance, the balance of power shifting not through numbers, weaponry, or intimidation, but through character, resolve, and the clarity of a single historically resonant utterance. And in this moment, the battlefield, the psychological terrain, and the narrative of history itself were forever altered. The soldiers, inspired, focused, and aware of their own stakes, preparing to act with unity, precision, and courage. Their morale elevated by the crystallizing act of defiance that transcended the immediacy of threat, embedding itself into the consciousness of every observer, participant, and future historian as the embodiment of principle, courage, and strategic mastery. And as the tension continued to build, every movement, every glance, every preparatory action was intensified, informed, and magnified by the knowledge that the general's one word had not merely answered a demand, but had rewritten the rules of engagement, challenged assumptions of authority, and asserted the irreducible power of human will, clarity, and moral courage in the face of overwhelming pressure, and the fog of war, the anticipation of confrontation, and the weight of history converged into a single unforgettable narrative moment. A suspended instant where courage, strategy, principle, and defiance intersected to produce a story that would echo through time, leaving soldiers, commanders, and observers in awe, breathless, and compelled to bear witness to the enduring legacy of one word that changed history, galvanized a nation's troops, and transformed a moment of negotiation into an eternal symbol of unyielding resolve and human fortitude. The moment the single word left the general's lips, the air seemed to vibrate with a mixture of tension, disbelief, and the unspoken understanding that the encounter had transcended a mere military demand and entered the realm of psychological warfare. And as the German officers froze, their posture rigid, yet subtly betraying the shock of being confronted with absolute, unyielding resolve, the assembled soldiers felt a surge of clarity and unity, their adrenaline spiking as the atmosphere of fear and anticipation transformed into a tightly wound focus on the actions they were about to undertake. While every man processed the implications of defiance under extreme pressure, aware that the next seconds could determine the fate of their unit, their positions, and the broader strategic landscape. And in the silence that followed the word, broken only by distant echoes of artillery, the crunch of boots on frost-hardened ground, and the barely perceptible shuffle of equipment, each soldier's mind raced, calculating, anticipating, and preparing, yet simultaneously absorbing the symbolic magnitude of the defiant reply, which acted as both a psychological shield and a clarion call to courage, reinforcing the chain of command, loyalty, and discipline within the ranks. And as the German officers recovered from their initial shock, their faces composed yet subtly strained, reflected a complex blend of tactical reassessment, disbelief, and the dawning realization that their assumed leverage had evaporated in an instant, replaced by a confrontation of will and principle that could not be coerced by threats alone. And as the emissaries exchanged furtive glances, subtle hand signals, and whispered commands, the soldiers under the general's command observed with heightened awareness, reading every micro-expression, every shift in posture, every nuance of tension, and translating them into anticipatory movements and defensive preparation. While the fog of war, both literal and metaphorical, seemed to thicken and swirl, heightening the sensory intensity, sharpening focus, and forcing a near-perfect synchronization of thought, action, and instinct among those who understood the stakes. And in the subtle interplay of silence, threat, and anticipation, the soldiers executed rapid, precise positioning, double-checking equipment, reviewing tactical maneuvers, and reinforcing communications, all guided by the unspoken assurance provided by the general's defiance, which transformed fear into purpose, uncertainty into clarity, and chaos into an orchestrated readiness that could confront the overwhelming threat posed by the enemy. And as the German emissaries adjusted their stance, attempting to assert authority through measured steps, subtle gestures, and the faint weight of intimidation, the American soldiers, inspired and galvanized, remained motionless yet poised, every muscle, nerve, and mind attuned to the next phase of engagement, while the psychological impact of the defiant word rippled outward, creating hesitation, recalculation, and a subtle, almost imperceptible anxiety among the opposing officers, who had expected compliance, immediate submission, and control, only to encounter a force of principle that could not be coerced. And as tension escalated to a near-visible pressure, the surrounding environment, the chill of early morning, the frozen landscape, the distant sounds of war, amplified each heartbeat, each breath, each micro-decision, creating a crucible of focus, discipline, and anticipation that demanded the utmost of every soldier. Present, And as the German emissaries finally began to speak, their words measured, cautious, attempting to negotiate, intimidate, or manipulate, the general's calm demeanor, unwavering gaze, and resolute presence acted as an unspoken countermeasure, asserting authority, control, and moral clarity, while subtly influencing the behavior of the opposing forces in a delicate, high-stakes psychological dance. And as the soldiers executed small, precise maneuvers, checking weapons, adjusting positions, and maintaining absolute readiness, they did so with a heightened awareness of both immediate danger and the symbolic weight of their actions, understanding that their conduct, coordination, and courage would not only impact the tactical outcome, but reinforce the enduring narrative of leadership, courage, and principle established by that singular, defiant word. And as minutes stretched, each filled with taut anticipation, the enemy's posture subtly shifted, micro-decisions echoing their hesitation, a psychological ripple effect that magnified the power of the initial defiance. While the general's soldiers remained fully alert, interpreting every sound, movement, and gesture with extraordinary focus, ready to act, react, and influence the unfolding encounter. And in this tense, almost cinematic environment, every sensory input, frost underfoot, the distant rattle of equipment, the faint echo of footsteps, the subtle movement of shadows, was amplified, processed, and integrated into instantaneous strategic decision-making, creating a dynamic interplay of human perception, instinct, and tactical acumen, while the German emissaries, increasingly aware of the extraordinary audacity, discipline, and psychological mastery they faced, continued to reassess, recalibrate, and navigate the complex interplay of threat, defiance, and potential engagement, all while the soldiers under the general's command absorbed, internalized, and embodied the courage, clarity, and unwavering resolve that had been so decisively communicated in a single word. And in that tense crucible of history, time seemed simultaneously compressed and elongated, each second a lifetime of anticipation, calculation, and psychological impact, as the stage was set for the unfolding sequence of events that would demonstrate not only tactical brilliance, but the extraordinary human capacity to command, inspire, and survive under conditions of extreme pressure, where a single word could shift the balance of power, shape behavior, and redefine the very meaning of courage, honor, and historical consequence, embedding in every participant, observer, and subsequent historian the realization that leadership, principle, and defiance can transcend immediate danger, numerical disadvantage, and intimidation, shaping outcomes, inspiring action, and leaving a legacy that resonates far beyond the battlefield. A narrative of suspense, courage, and moral authority that demands complete attention, total immersion, and unwavering focus from the viewer, as the tension, stakes, and psychological complexity escalate toward the next phase of engagement. A story where every heartbeat, breath, and micro-decision becomes a vital thread in the tapestry of history shaped by that one unforgettable, defiant word. As the initial shock of defiance rippled through the German emissaries, the general's soldiers shifted from the surreal tension of the ultimatum into precise, deliberate preparation. Every movement calibrated, every breath measured, as the frozen morning air carried both the distant rumble of artillery and the subtle indications of enemy recalibration. And the men, guided by the unwavering presence of their leader, executed a choreography of readiness that blended discipline, instinct, and improvisation, checking weapons, reinforcing defensive positions, and establishing observation posts that allowed maximum awareness of the enemy's adjustments, while simultaneously internalizing the symbolic power of the general's defiance, which had transformed fear into focus, hesitation into anticipation, and uncertainty into a heightened state of coordinated action. And as the German officers conferred in hushed, urgent tones, attempting to extract compliance, regain initiative, and assert the psychological upper hand, their movements were scrutinized by sharp, trained eyes, interpreting subtle micro-expressions, shifts in stance, and changes in the weight of their steps as signals of intent, capability, and potential strategy, while the general orchestrated his own forces with quiet authority, issuing commands that were precise yet adaptive, balancing the need for immediate action with the strategic foresight required to anticipate enemy maneuvers. And the soldiers, fully aware that every second of hesitation or error could be catastrophic, moved with fluid precision, positioning units to maximize cover, fields of fire and lines of communication, while establishing redundancies and contingencies that accounted for the unexpected, the unpredictable, and the potentially overwhelming, all guided by the psychological momentum generated by the defiant reply, which had shifted the energy of the confrontation from intimidation to measured anticipation, turning what could have been a moment of paralysis into a crucible of skill, focus, and human ingenuity. And as enemy scouts probed positions, tested reactions, and attempted subtle intimidation through tactical posturing, the American soldiers observed, adapted, and countered with split-second decisions, leveraging terrain, observation, and the disciplined execution of pre-planned yet flexible maneuvers, each action simultaneously defensive and opportunistic, creating a dynamic interplay between anticipation, reaction, and initiative. While the fog of war, both literal in patches of morning mist and figurative in the uncertainty of enemy intention, amplified the stakes, requiring extraordinary concentration, situational awareness, and the seamless integration of instinct and tactical knowledge. And as the German officers coordinated their forces, signaling movements that were intended to pressure, confuse, or provoke compliance, the American soldiers, trained and inspired by the defiance of their leader, responded with near-perfect timing, exploiting every subtle weakness, movement, or hesitation, maintaining cohesion under pressure and converting stress into operational effectiveness. While the general's presence continued to galvanize morale, sharpen focus, and enforce a discipline that transcended ordinary command, turning the psychological environment of threat into a controlled battlefield of anticipation, observation, and adaptive action. And as the minutes stretched, the soldiers internalized the rhythm of the unfolding confrontation, integrating auditory cues, the distant clatter of equipment, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the faint echo of movement, and visual cues, the subtle motion of enemy ranks, the positioning of officers, the shifting patterns of terrain into instantaneous calculations that informed every micro-movement, every adjustment, and every tactical decision, creating a fluid, responsive, and resilient force capable of withstanding overwhelming psychological and physical pressure, while simultaneously shaping the perceptions and decisions of the opposing forces, who increasingly recognized the extraordinary precision, coordination, and mental acuity of the general's command. And as the enemy began tentative maneuvers, probing defenses, testing reactions, and attempting to intimidate, they encountered a cohesion, discipline, and readiness that defied expectation, forcing recalculation, hesitation, and doubt. While the soldiers exploited the psychological advantage conferred by their leader's defiance, which had transformed a moment of potential surrender into a narrative of control, preparedness, and calculated courage, and within this heightened state of tension, each man acted with extraordinary awareness, blending training, instinct, and the momentum of collective morale into a seamless operational flow, anticipating enemy moves, adjusting positioning, reinforcing weak points, and coordinating fire with precision as the general silently monitored, assessed, and subtly directed actions, ensuring that every decision, every adjustment, and every tactical execution maximized both survival and impact, while the enemy, confronted with a force whose cohesion, readiness, and resolve had been crystallized by a single word, struggled to maintain initiative, their own command structure strained under the psychological weight of unexpected defiance. And in this crucible of strategy, anticipation, and psychological pressure, the stage was set for the confrontation to come, a battle of wits, courage, and coordination that would test the soldiers to their limits, elevate the significance of leadership, and demonstrate the extraordinary power of principle and resolve in the theater of war, leaving an indelible imprint on both sides, as every movement, decision, and subtle action became part of a historic narrative of tactical brilliance, human endurance, and the irreversible consequences of a moment defined by courage and a single, unforgettable word that had reshaped the psychological and strategic battlefield in ways that would echo far beyond the immediate confrontation, inspiring awe, suspense, and unbroken engagement from all who would witness, recount, or study the events as they unfolded in this extraordinary sequence of preparation. observation, and tactical mastery under extreme pressure. The tension, so carefully built in the hours of preparation, reached a palpable crescendo as the first signs of German maneuvering transitioned from tentative probes to overt positioning. And the soldiers, guided by the general's unwavering composure, moved with a fluid coordination that was both deliberate and instinctive, as if every action, every glance, every breath had been harmonized into a single, living organism of strategic brilliance. And as the enemy advanced, testing lines, probing defenses, and attempting to exploit any hint of hesitation, the soldiers responded with precise, rapid deployment utilizing cover, elevation, and the frozen terrain to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing exposure. Each movement a blend of disciplined training, instantaneous judgment, and adaptive improvisation, while the general, observing the unfolding battlefield with unerring focus, anticipated enemy responses, issued subtle, near-silent commands, and reinforced the psychological and tactical cohesion of his forces, transforming fear into determination, uncertainty into action, and the overwhelming appearance of enemy strength into an environment where skill, courage, and ingenuity could dominate. And as the first exchanges of fire erupted, sharp, staccato bursts of rifle and machine gun fire mingled with the distant thunder of artillery, creating a chaotic symphony of destruction. Yet the soldiers, immersed in the rhythm of battle, navigated the chaos with extraordinary awareness, reading the slightest shifts in enemy posture, interpreting auditory cues of movement through frozen brush or shifting snow, and exploiting fleeting windows of vulnerability with calculated aggression, while the German officers, confronted by both unexpected resistance and the flawless execution of defense, attempted to adjust, reposition, and assert their authority, yet found themselves reacting to a force whose timing, precision, and morale had been amplified by the psychological momentum initiated by a single word of defiance. And as the engagement escalated, the fog of war, both literal and metaphorical, interwove with the physical battlefield, creating a dynamic where visibility, perception, and reaction time became instruments of survival, every sound magnified, every shadow potentially lethal, and every decision carrying the weight of life, morale, and historical consequence. And amidst this maelstrom of strategy and survival, soldiers performed acts of extraordinary improvisation and courage, exploiting terrain, enemy overextension, and minute tactical opportunities to disrupt advances, neutralize threats, and protect comrades, each action resonating with the psychological underpinning established by the general's defiance, which imbued every soldier with a sense of purpose, clarity, and unshakable resolve. And as skirmishes unfolded in microcosms across the battlefield, alternating between intense bursts of violence and tense anticipation, the soldiers adapted in real time, adjusting formations, concentrating fire, creating suppressive strategies, and coordinating movements that transformed chaos into controlled, lethal efficiency, while the enemy, confronted by a cohesive, alert, and psychologically resilient force, struggled to regain initiative, their attempts to intimidate and dominate thwarted by the seamless integration of preparation, observation, and rapid execution of tactical maneuvers. And as the first decisive confrontations resulted in localized successes, the soldiers' confidence grew, reinforcing morale and creating cascading effects on both sides. As the Americans exploited every subtle hesitation, misalignment, or miscommunication among the enemy ranks, turning small victories into momentum and converting fear into tactical advantage, while the general, remaining calm yet acutely present, projected authority, inspired initiative, and maintained an overarching command that orchestrated these micro-successes into a coherent strategic advantage. And as the minutes stretched into a prolonged engagement, every moment carried psychological and tactical weight, each burst of fire, repositioning of units, and micro-adjustment of formation contributing to the broader narrative of defiance, resilience, and operational brilliance, while the fog, distant gunfire, and shifting snowfields added layers of suspense, danger, and uncertainty, demanding continuous adaptation, hyper-awareness, and extraordinary courage from each participant. And within this crucible, the soldiers became living embodiments of discipline, ingenuity, and human resolve, their actions synchronized not only by command but by shared understanding of stakes. the moral authority established by the general's defiance, and the dynamic reality of survival under extreme pressure. And as the clash intensified, enemy forces pressed harder, probing weak points, attempting to outmaneuver, and creating near-lethal scenarios. Yet every advance was met with calculated resistance, traps, concentrated fire, and ingenious improvisation that disrupted momentum, delayed objectives, and inflicted significant psychological and physical consequences, while the soldiers remained adaptive, resilient, and alert, exploiting every opportunity to turn apparent chaos into controlled action, maintaining cohesion under stress, and converting the fog of uncertainty into a force multiplier for skill and resolve. And as the battle unfolded across the terrain, the psychological impact of the initial one-word defiance manifested repeatedly, reinforcing unity, focus, and determination, shaping each action and reaction, and embedding itself into the narrative of courage, heroism, and tactical mastery, so that every participant, observer, and subsequent historian could recognize that this was not merely a confrontation of firepower or numbers, but a clash of wills, strategy, and principle, where extraordinary human qualities, discipline, and courage dictated outcomes and inspired awe, suspense, and total engagement. And in this relentless, immersive crucible of action, the soldiers executed with precision, bravery, and instinct, creating a sequence of events where tactical brilliance, psychological mastery, and heroic improvisation converged to transform the battlefield into a living testament of human resilience, leadership, and defiance, culminating in a series of small victories, critical survival decisions, and heroic maneuvers that set the stage for the ultimate resolution, and left an indelible mark on history, proving that one word of defiance, combined with preparation, courage, and tactical skill, could ripple through every action, shaping outcomes, inspiring participants, and captivating observers with a story of suspense, mastery, and unforgettable heroism that demanded unbroken attention from the first spark of engagement to the final echo of conflict. As the echoes of the first clash gradually faded into the distance, leaving only the distant rumble of retreating footsteps, the intermittent crack of artillery, and the subdued murmur of tense regrouping, the soldiers surveyed a battlefield transformed by violence, courage, and the razor-sharp execution of strategy, and in the frozen air each breath seemed amplified, each heartbeat a reminder of the fragility of life and the extraordinary resilience demanded by such circumstances. And as the dust, smoke, and lingering haze of gunfire began to lift, revealing the jagged remnants of barricades, scorched earth, and wounded comrades, the men moved with deliberate care, tending to the injured, reinforcing positions, and re-establishing lines of communication, all while absorbing the psychological weight of what had transpired, understanding that survival was not merely a function of skill or luck, but a combination of courage, discipline, and the unshakable moral authority established by their leader's singular, defiant word, which had continued to ripple through every action and decision, embedding itself as a guiding principle, a source of clarity, and an anchor of resolve in the midst of chaos. And as officers reviewed casualties, assessed tactical gains and losses, and recalculated the next steps, the soldiers internalized the lessons of improvisation, resilience, and situational awareness, recognizing that every small success, every act of heroism, and every survival decision had cumulative impact on both immediate engagement and broader strategic outcomes, while the German officers, contending with the unexpected efficacy, discipline, and tactical brilliance of the Americans, struggled to regain control, their authority challenged by both the results of the clash and the psychological imprint of defiance. And amidst the mixture of relief, grief, and lingering tension, the soldiers engaged in a silent reflection, their minds cataloging each maneuver, each decision, each split-second action, and translating experience into instinct for future encounters, while simultaneously processing the human cost, the fallen comrades, the injured, the near misses, and the lingering sense of mortality that underscored every tactical calculation. And as medics moved efficiently through the ranks, stabilizing the wounded and coordinating evacuation, the soldiers reinforced defensive positions, reorganized units, and redistributed resources, maintaining the cohesion, readiness, and morale that had been so decisively bolstered by the symbolic power of defiance, which continued to infuse courage into even the most fatigued or shaken members of the unit. And as the environment itself bore the marks of conflict, the churned earth, shattered trees, and scorched structures, the soldiers adapted to the transformed terrain, using the lessons of observation, timing, and anticipation honed in battle to secure vantage points, anticipate enemy movement, and reinforce weak areas while maintaining flexibility for subsequent engagements, all executed with an acute awareness that history was observing. Memory was recording, and every action, decision, and gesture was both tactical and symbolic, reflecting not only the immediate human struggle but the broader narrative of courage, resilience, and defiance under extreme pressure. And as commanders conferred, updating strategies, communicating with distant units, and reassessing potential threats, the soldiers moved with remarkable synchronicity, blending training, instinct, and adaptive judgment into a seamless operational rhythm. While simultaneously experiencing the psychological relief of survival interwoven with the lingering adrenaline and tension of near catastrophe, and as the German forces recalibrated their approach, hesitant and measured, the Americans exploited subtle signs of indecision, hesitation, and fatigue, using small-scale maneuvers, calculated positioning, and precise observation to assert influence over the tactical environment, reinforcing morale while creating psychological pressure on the opposing force. And in this dynamic interplay of action, reaction, anticipation, and reflection, every soldier became a living embodiment of resilience, courage, and tactical intelligence. Their decisions informed not only by immediate necessity but by the enduring impact of their leader's defiant word, which continued to resonate as both symbol and practical guidance, shaping behavior, morale, and strategic effectiveness. While the fog of uncertainty, both literal and metaphorical, continued to obscure potential threats, amplify stakes, and demand constant vigilance, attention, and adaptation, creating an environment in which split-second judgment, clarity of purpose, and disciplined execution could spell the difference between survival and catastrophe. And as the hours stretched on with each successive movement, adjustment, and calculated risk, the soldiers solidified their understanding of teamwork, strategic foresight, and the human capacity to operate under extreme psychological and physical pressure, integrating lessons learned from the clash into ongoing operational awareness. While the enemy, confronted repeatedly by a force whose cohesion, skill, and moral authority were unwavering, increasingly faltered in confidence, hesitation, and tactical initiative, creating openings that could be exploited in both defensive and offensive maneuvers. And as the soldiers navigated this delicate balance of aftermath, reflection, and continued readiness, they internalized a profound awareness of the stakes, their own limitations, and the extraordinary influence of leadership, principle, and courage, realizing that history itself was being written not in grandiose displays, but in the cumulative effect of disciplined preparation, heroic improvisation, and the psychological momentum of defiance, which had transformed fear into unity, uncertainty into strategic clarity, and chaos into orchestrated action. And in this extended period of tension, adaptation, and reflection, the soldiers' focus, skill, and moral resolve were continually tested, reinforced, and sharpened, laying the groundwork for the final, climactic moments of confrontation where courage, decisiveness, and unwavering principle would again intersect with the chaos of battle, ensuring that the legacy of the general's singular word and the extraordinary human response it inspired would culminate in a sequence of events that would resonate in memory, history, and the collective consciousness of all who witnessed, endured, or studied this extraordinary episode, leaving an indelible impression of suspense, heroism, and the transformative power of courage, leadership, and moral authority in shaping outcomes, survival, and the enduring narrative of human resilience under the most extreme conditions imaginable. As the final hours of the confrontation unfolded, the soldiers, fatigued yet galvanized by the extraordinary events of the day, moved through a battlefield shaped by chaos, courage, and the razor-sharp execution of both strategy and principle. And the general, unwavering and resolute, continued to embody the moral and tactical authority that had been so decisively established by that single, defiant word, which now reverberated through every action, decision, and heartbeat of the men under his command, as well as through the hesitant, recalibrating ranks of the opposing German forces, whose confidence, initiative, and psychological composure had been repeatedly challenged and reshaped by the unwavering resolve they confronted. And as soldiers assessed the final positions, reinforced critical points, and attended to the last remaining tasks of survival, observation and preparation, the fog of battle, now partially lifted, revealed the full scale of the extraordinary resistance, improvisation, and heroism that had defined the engagement, with every scarred position, spent weapon, and battered comrade serving as both testament and symbol of the human capacity to endure, adapt, and prevail under conditions of extreme pressure, while the general, surveying the landscape with calm precision, guided remaining forces with subtle authority, ensuring cohesion, readiness, and psychological stability. And the soldiers, inspired and alert, internalized both the tactical and symbolic significance of the day's events, understanding that survival, success, and historical consequence were bound together in an intricate, unbroken chain of courage, discipline, and moral clarity. And as distant sounds of movement, reconnaissance, and the residual echo of engagement reverberated across the terrain, each man's senses were heightened to an extraordinary degree, detecting subtle shifts in enemy posture, listening for the faintest signals of threat, and interpreting every visual cue with split-second precision, while the German officers, confronted by the immutable resolve, adaptive brilliance, and psychological dominance of the Americans, struggled to maintain composure, authority, and direction, and every tentative move they made was observed, calculated, and where possible countered, reinforcing the narrative that the battle had been won not merely by force of arms, but by the extraordinary interplay of leadership, courage, strategy, and psychological mastery. And as the day drew toward its closing moments, the soldiers, acting with coordinated discipline, executed final maneuvers that secured positions, protected vulnerable units, and consolidated tactical advantage, while simultaneously reflecting the enduring influence of the general's Defiance, which continued to galvanize morale, reinforce cohesion, and transform the perception of danger into a controlled, actionable environment, and the psychological tension, so carefully maintained throughout the engagement, now began to resolve into a potent mixture of relief, pride, and awe, as the men understood that their collective skill, courage, and focus had not only ensured survival, but had reshaped the immediate strategic situation, embedding itself into the broader narrative of heroism, historical consequence, and the power of principle in human affairs. And as final reports were exchanged, positions secured, and reconnaissance confirmed the diminishing presence and hesitation of the enemy, the soldiers experienced a profound sense of achievement tempered by the knowledge of loss, danger, and the fragility of life, while simultaneously absorbing the enduring lesson that extraordinary outcomes often hinge upon singular acts of courage, clarity, and moral authority, exemplified by the general's defiant word, whose simplicity belied the monumental impact it exerted on every dimension of the confrontation, shaping perception, guiding action, and inspiring extraordinary human performance. And as night began to settle over the battlefield, casting long shadows over the scarred earth, frozen terrain, and battered positions, the soldiers remained vigilant, fully aware that survival and success had been earned through a combination of preparation, instinct, courage, and the psychological momentum established by leadership, yet allowing themselves the briefest measure of reflection on the extraordinary journey from initial ultimatum to the climactic consolidation of victory. And as the German forces withdrew, hesitant, recalibrating, and increasingly aware of the indomitable nature of the Americans' resolve, the battlefield became both a scene of strategic triumph and a monument to the human capacity for resilience, bravery, and moral clarity under extreme duress. And as the last vestiges of fog and tension dissipated, the general's one word, uttered hours earlier in calm defiance, echoed through the memories of all. Participants, observers, and future chroniclers, a symbol of courage, principle, and the extraordinary power of human will in the theater of war. And the soldiers, standing amidst the aftermath, reflecting upon the combination of chaos, improvisation, and heroic decision-making that had brought them to this point, absorbed the profound truth that history is often shaped not by the volume of commands, the number of troops, or the weight of weapons, but by the clarity, courage, and defiance of a single voice, a single decision, a single word. And in this suspended moment of triumph, relief, reflection, and unbroken tension, the narrative of heroism, strategy, and psychological mastery reached its zenith, leaving an indelible impression on every participant, on every observer, and on all who would recount, analyze, and remember this extraordinary episode, an unforgettable testament to the enduring power of leadership, courage, and moral authority to shape outcomes, inspire action, and define history in ways that echo far beyond the immediate battlefield, leaving viewers, readers, and future generations riveted, awed, and inspired by the profound impact of one word that changed everything, crystallizing suspense, heroism, and human endurance into a narrative that demands complete attention from first moment to final echo, ensuring that the story of this remarkable defiance remains etched in memory, suspense, and historical legacy forever.